That's a pre-COVID picture of Chance there. Very nice.
Yes. The beard is in full full effect.
It actually comes and goes with the moon. When the moon is full, he has a beard. When it's all right, so it's now 2 p.m., so I am going to start this for all of our participants. So welcome. I'm David Randall, Director of Research at the National Association of Scholars, and we're delighted to be able to provide some publicity for work by an allied series of people in Idaho. This is Social Justice Ideology in Idaho Higher Education, where the two co-authors are Scott Yenor, a Washington Fellow at Claremont's Center for the American Way of Life, and Anna K. Miller, an education analyst at the Idaho Freedom Foundation. And I should say the Idaho Freedom Foundation has sponsored this report. So, we're just delighted that they're doing this, in fact, independently of us, but they're interested in the same sort of stuff as the NAS. And indeed, we have published Social Justice Education in America. What we always wanted was to have somebody doing local investigations of social justice in individual universities and colleges in the individual states to try to make real policy change at the university and state level. And this is what the Idaho Freedom Foundation, Scott and Anna, are doing. So it's just wonderful and extraordinary. What we're here then is to hear them talking about the substance of their report, and then also ideally something of the how-to, because this ought to be happening everywhere, and they're showing how this can be done. So we're going to be getting first, I think 20 minutes each, first Scott, then Anna, then there'll be some moderated discussion and questions, and then questions from the audience. Please, your tabs at the bottom of the screen, there's both a chat and a Q&A. Please put your questions into either. I will try to relay them, and or Scott and Anna will maybe be answering some of them directly. And any question that doesn't get answered, please send to me afterwards. That's randall@nas.org, RANDALL@nas.org. I'll pass them on to Scott and Anna afterwards. So you never need to worry about your questions not getting answered. It'll get there sooner or later. And and sorry, not to keep you from speaking, this is being recorded. It will be posted. People who want to see the link, it'll be up on the NAS YouTube channel within 24 hours, and frankly, usually within 6 or so. So everyone will have a chance to see this afterwards. Okay, so the two things that are being mentioned, Scott, assessing social justice plans for a particular university, and Anna, measuring social justice ideology in the curriculum. And Scott, first, if you'd be so kind.
Thank you, David, and thanks everyone for joining us. I want to thank NAS. I'm a proud lifetime member of NAS, and for all the great work that they did. And David's work, Social Justice Education in America, actually inspired me with the idea of completing such a task when it comes to each of Idaho's universities. There's been some controversy here over the last few years as the university president, the past university presidents have founded commissions on diversity and inclusion and relayed long-term plans for how Boise State was to be transformed from a culture that represented the dominant norms of society into one that is more welcoming. And we all know that these are kind of in our news speak, a sort of code word for building up an infrastructure on campus that represents critical race theory or social justice education, or whatever term you want to use to describe it. So as this has been in the news here, we thought that developing an objective way of measuring the development of social justice ideology on each of our campuses was a most needful thing. And so I allied with friends at Idaho Freedom and Anna to design a way of assessing how deeply social justice ideology has penetrated the plans of the university, the curriculum of the university, the student life of the university, and the university as a whole, really. And these are categories I think that every university has, and every public university should be evaluated. We did some data gathering. We hired someone to put together a list of all the required classes in the general ed offerings, to put the course descriptions in a file, and then we judged each of those according to certain standards. We did a lot of archival work when it came to finding plans that the university had made, reports that the universities have made, and about how they are going to promote diversity, inclusion, and equity on the campuses. And most of them are public, and we've used those reports to try to shape the way Boise State thinks about diversity, inclusion, and equity on its own campus, and why it and the various ways in which Boise State is going to go about trying to extend the reach of those particular values and this particular ideology. And what Anna and I are doing today is we're dividing up the labor when it comes to what we looked for. What we looked for, two broad categories, were what the administration plans to do and what the curriculum and student life is like. And what I'm going to do is talk about what we found when we investigated the administrative plans, and how we went about finding it. And then Anna's going to talk about the curricular and student life aspect of it. And then that this is something that we're both very persuaded can be, as I said before, duplicated at other universities. I think you can take basically our introduction, where we talk about what social justice ideology is, and copy and paste that and say, this is what we're going to do. We're going to look into how far it has reached into universities. I think you can take our first page about what administration is on a campus, and what they can do when it comes to any particular policy, and then we're drilling down and looking at what they're doing on this policy. I think the introduction to the student life / curriculum section can just be cut and pasted from our report and used at other universities. So our hope is that what we've done here is very reproducible in the structure, and then you have to fill in what is happening at your universities. And if we could get a group of something like 100 universities analyzed, we could rank them. We could actually do a scientific study of how the universities themselves are captured by this ideology. So once again, I hope that that these reports can be reproduced elsewhere in the country, and that we can, and we're happy to make our stuff available if you want to contact us for such things, but we'll get to that at the end of our talk today. So administration, that's my portfolio. I'm going to talk about the administration and what we investigated. Now, Anna and I are both, we're almost done with our second report on the University of Idaho. And we have 2 pages in the report dedicated to what we call how it happened. And that really is just the timeline for the committees that the university has established, the commissions that they have established, the charges for what those committees are, and the results or plans made by those committees, and then tracing out the execution of those particular plans. In Boise State's case, the plans began much later, I think, than other universities. In 2017 is when they began, when President Bob Kustra then established a Commission on Diversity and Inclusion, and it released its report in July of 2017. And they announced their plans to transform the university, as they say, from one that has reinforced cultural, structural, and personal norms in rural Idaho to one that is more welcoming and inclusive. And then they laid out things that they wanted to do over the next few years in order to accomplish this goal. They talked about hiring a kind of sub-provost level director of diversity and inclusion. changing hiring practices, adopting new kinds of student recruitment measures, scholarships for illegal aliens, and things were all included in their plans. And there was an interim report that was put out to the university community 2 years after the initial report in June of 2019, talking about the progress they had made in establishing social justice institutions and policies and practices and curriculum across the university. And they announced in that particular moment that they were going to now begin a job search for a vice provost for equity and inclusion. So now they're going to kick it up to a higher level, and that job was posted, and that's also in the timeline. And so, in other words, it was just using the university's mostly publicly available documents. They actually buried one of these documents, but that we had it saved somewhere. Using their documents to just explain without moralizing or condemning what was going on, but just explaining what they themselves say that they are doing to the university. They say it openly and proudly on the university campus to their colleagues, but when the legislature sees it, they have a different attitude. So when you look at such plans and you make such plans publicly available, you put the administration in a position where they have to say something like, we are not building a diversity and inclusion empire at our university, though it is very, very important that we do it. And if they have to defend that position in front of the legislature is much more inclined to ask questions and perhaps act. So the first thing that we looked at is this particular timeline. The second thing we looked at is what each individual college says about its own goals when it comes to diversity, inclusion, and equity within the college. And they almost all have statements now. At Boise State, they don't yet have that much by way of hiring in these particular areas. We don't have a College of Engineering diversity person. We don't have one for the College of Arts and Sciences, but we do have statements about shared values on each on almost every college's website. And so what we did is we think that there's a progression that happens. You announce shared values, then you make it into part of your strategic plan. When it's part of your strategic plan, you are judged on whether or not you achieve that goal. And if you don't, you ask for more resources to achieve it. So we think that the announcing of shared values is the first opening wedge into building an apparatus within each of these colleges. That's what happens at most places that have a more sophisticated built out infrastructure for promoting diversity, inclusion, and equity. And we think that Boise State, as we say in the report, is beyond the infancy here, but not yet at adolescence when it comes to this. But once again, other universities like the University of Idaho are more progressed in this particular way. They have actual associate deans in engineering. So that's the second thing we look at is the dean level, college level aspirations that the university has made for itself. And the other thing we do in this administrative part is we talk about the policies of the campus. And here we follow in the wake of FIRE and use FIRE's way of assessing the university's free speech harassment policies. We try to show the ambiguities or difficulties that are involved in the particular policy. And then there are some policies that are more unique to each institution. So for instance, in Boise State, the Boise Police Department has been recently had its contract severed, and the year that they have left on their contract, all the policemen have to take implicit bias training in order to serve on the campus. That's a policy that the university has adopted. We have it well footnoted, and then we put that under the policy section. We also put the kind of hiring practices, committee trainings that have to be done in order to get a job search going and brought to completion. In this case, at Boise State, it's implicit bias training that has to be done for each faculty. There's also faculty training that is now optional, but might in the nature of things, become mandatory. And that is that there's how to promote diversity, inclusion, and equity in the classroom. And Title IX issues also we discuss. Boise State followed the general approach. It adopted the Dear Colleague letter. And then when the Trump administration under Betsy DeVos rescinded it, they rescinded it. And I think they're now fixing to re-adopt it. And they're doing making a lot of sounds about that. And there's some indications that will probably be happening. So, we really honed in on these policies. And I think it allows us to paint a picture, as I say, that the administration, where it can act without obstacles and on its own, is doing a job of prioritizing this social justice ideology over other aspects of its core educational mission. And having shown that in these particular areas, we talked about one more thing, and that was that the original diversity inclusion plan that was put out in July 2017 established a student board. It's called the Inclusive Excellence Student Council, that has really become a third branch of the student government here. And we've tried to chart how they have increased their role in decision making on campus. And the chief thing that has happened here, I think, is their role with the police. That is, this Inclusive Excellence Student Council seems to have been active, first in severing the contract with the police, and second in making it very uncomfortable for vendors on campus who support the police to remain on campus. And in fact, there's been kind of a blow up here about a particular vendor being pushed off campus by the university, and but at the behest of the Inclusive Excellence Student Council. And what's happening here is that these are members of the council are paid by the university through student fees, we think, and then given a voice in what vendors are going to be given contracts at the university. And so that's something that was established by the university. It's a position that is supported by upper administration, including the Dean of Students and the Director of Diversity and Inclusion, that will probably be under the Vice Provost for Diversity and Inclusion when that person is hired. And so we expect the role of this particular, in fact, promises have been made, according to the transcripts of the meetings, that the students will have an increased role in choosing vendors in the future. So where the administration could act, we've tried to identify the places where they have supported or helped expand the mission of the social justice ideology or critical race theory. And now it's harder for them to act in other areas like curriculum, where they have to face departments who have other kinds of norms and standards. And so we had to try to navigate that. And for the account of how we navigated that, I'm going to turn it over to Anna.
Hi, everyone. So I'm Anna Miller with the Idaho Freedom Foundation. Thank you, NAS, for having us here today. So I'm going to go over section 2 of our report, curriculum and student experience. So the first question here is, how do we measure social justice education in curriculum and in student experience? So to begin with curriculum, basically what we did is we imagined the student experience as a pathway through general education and then through a major. We used the course catalog, which is available on universities' websites, and we got course descriptions from that catalog for the general education courses, and we use that as a reflection of course content. We also got department mission statements, program learning outcomes, and requirements for major courses from the course catalog. And so we judged each department or college based on 4 factors, and those are mission statements, the program learning outcomes, the contributions to the general education, and then required major courses. And then you'll see in our report that we categorize departments further in three different ways. So red, yellow, or green. Red departments we considered to have social justice language infused in all four of the factors I just mentioned. And then for a yellow department, it was just 2 or 3 of those factors. And then if a department is categorized as green, that means they have little to no social justice ideology in their programmatic statements. So another question is what traits in these factors suggest the presence of social justice ideology? So it really comes down to language, and language that affirms diversity, social justice, empathy, inclusion, identifying oppressive power structures, things like that, aligning the department's mission statement against isms or phobias, so racism, sexism, ableism, classism, homophobia, it goes on and on. And then rejecting or questioning the basis of a national identity or American identity in favor of a global or transnational or subnational identity. And then finally, commitment to activism as opposed to study. These are all things that denote the presence of social justice in the 4 categories that we rated departments on. So like one example of a course that we found that we identify as a social justice course was one general education course called University Foundations 200 at Boise State, Themes in Ethics and Diversity. And the description for this course is a history of inequality and marginalization. So this is really just an easy example to understand how we categorize things. Another example for a mission statement would be the mission statement belonging to the Department of Sociology, which is we study the key divisions of a society, the social order, social inequality, social change, race, class, gender, labor, and sexuality. The Department of Sociology is a community for social change, social justice, and equality. So that's another example of a mission statement we would suggest is a social justice mission statement. We found, interestingly, that even seemingly professional colleges like the College of Business and Economics or the College of Engineering and even the Graduate College had adopted an emphasis on social justice in their shared values. Overall, what we concluded as we went through all these requirements was that students cannot avoid exposure to social justice in their education, but they can avoid things like American history or government or literature. Students cannot graduate at Boise State without taking a minimum of 4 or 5 social justice courses in their general education requirements. But then the rest of a student's exposure to social justice education really depends on the major that they choose. And so at Boise State, we identified, for example, 6 departments in our red category. And some of these were seemingly obvious ones that we kind of expected, like gender studies or global studies or sociology, social work. But then even history and criminal justice turned out to be heavily infiltrated with social justice, and that was a bit surprising. Students also at Boise State are required to take what's called first-year writing courses, which a lot of universities have. And at Boise State, this often includes something called service learning or experiential learning. And this is really a way for universities to divert resources, student labor, and money to progressive nonprofits. And I know, David Randall, you've written about this in your book and explained that it draws from radical ideas like that of John Dewey, revolutionary pedagogy of Paulo Freire, Mao's China. We didn't expand very much in this report on service learning or experiential learning. Going forward in our next report on the University of Idaho, we plan to dive into this area more because it's really an area that connotates that social justice has taken over a certain department, because it shows that teachers and students are not engaged in search for knowledge anymore, but instead they're really trying to prepare students for a career in activism. So that brings us to our last section of the report, which is residence life. So we evaluated residence halls by looking at residence life mission statements and then who the residence life hires, considering the personnel as policy. So prior to 2011, university housing at Boise State was seen as a business relationship between the university and students. but it has since been transformed through Residence Life staff to emphasize promoting things like inclusive, safe, and caring communities. And so another way we evaluated residence halls was to look at the biographies for residence hall directors, which were available on the university websites. And we found that promotion of social justice was really a prerequisite for hiring residence directors. So just as one example, one individual that's a residence hall director, their bio says they are passionate about building safe, inclusive communities where every member has the support they need to be successful. And this individual has also been involved in smearing a local business as a white supremacist just because they support the police. And so we found things like this in every residence director's bio. And so we concluded that even where students live and sleep is thoroughly permeated with social justice ideology, so much so that residents cannot avoid it in most of campus life. One thing I would have done differently in this section and plan to do differently as we move on to examine other universities is to look more into what is called living learning communities. And these are basically housing units. They're dedicated to themes like social justice, activism, gender, global citizenship, things like that. And they often have these things called bias response teams who sort of try to enforce the social justice orthodoxy on campus. And then there's one more thing I would have added to this report and plan to add to other reports in the future, which is social justice events. So Boise State actually has an entire webpage that catalogs social justice events. And the title of the webpage is Social Justice Events. This is something we didn't examine in the report, but I think we will examine more at other universities in the future. So finally, I want to touch on some recommendations for reform we include in this report for legislative reform. So we recommend 9 pretty practical reforms. These are unique to Idaho, but similar initiatives could work in other states. The key to reforming these universities is trying to disrupt the ability for universities to provide stable careers for social justice activists. Many people working in higher education, they emphasize the need for and the importance of protecting free speech. And we do include free speech as a policy recommendation, but we actually think some other initiatives are more important. And that's largely because free speech could be protected on campus at a public university, but that wouldn't necessarily change its ideological commitments. People that believe in social justice, they regularly object to things like trigger warnings, hate speech, to safe spaces. They deliberately reject the idea that colleges should be places where ideas are freely exchanged. They believe that not all ideas are equal, and some are just too offensive to have a place in community. And so attacks of this sort are obviously designed to shut down free speech, and it's just completely antithetical to the existence of free speech. Its advocates, they want conformity. So that's why for real legislative reform, you really need to root out the teaching of social justice in these universities. So some of our main policy recommendations in the report include restricting funding to public universities that are infused with social justice ideology. The legislature can restore funds to universities that are pursuing their core mission. So in Idaho, the state board defines universities' core missions as protecting academic freedom, advancing truth, and supporting the common good. So you could require universities to go back to their mission, and if they do not, they will not receive their funding back. You could also require universities to reduce administrative bloat and then prove these changes to the legislature before funding is restored. We also suggest that the legislature should adopt a resolution that social justice education does not serve the common good. And this would allow the state boards to differentiate between universities who are following their core mission and then those who are not. Another reform we have in here, we're calling the Student Choice Initiative. Basically, students are required to pay fees as well as tuition. And we are advocating for students to have a choice over what fees they should be required to pay or not. Obviously, some fees like building projects or campus safety or campus health centers, students need to pay for. But there's a lot of other things that student fees funds, like gender equity centers, like LGBTQ centers, multicultural centers, a lot of different things that we are just suggesting students should have a choice to opt out of, just to give power back to students so that they can decide what they want to see on campus. Overall, showing this report to legislators in Idaho, they have been really excited about it. It's influenced them to a point where when university presidents came to present to legislative committees, legislators actually asked presidents questions based on our report. So that was a significant change from years in the past. So legislative reform, it's important, but there's things outside of legislative reform that could also have a big impact. You know, alumni that are concerned about these things, they can stop giving to universities if they don't agree with what they are doing. And students can also practice resistance in different ways. So part of the goal of this project is definitely to raise public awareness and affect culture in a way. Yeah, and so I'll close by touching on one thing Scott talked about. This project, it began at Boise State, but we're certainly not finished yet. We're examining all of the public universities in Idaho. We want to just determine how far this ideology has gone overall in higher education in Idaho. And we hope that friends in other states will partner with us to further this project so that we can, like Scott said, rank, say 100 universities against each other and see, where social justice has the strongest grip, and then call, red states to act. So I'll close with that, and I'll give the floor back to you, David.
Thank you so much. Well, thank you both so much for your wonderful presentations. I'm going to ask some questions of you first before we shift over to audience, and then frankly, I may just go back and forth. This is sort of overlapping questions you've already answered, but what did you learn while doing the first report? And and what if you were to do the first report differently, how would you do that?
Yeah, well, thanks for that, David. I mean, one of the things I think we learned is the need to investigate constants. So looking at harassment policies, looking at hiring policies over all the universities, like honing in precisely on the things that each university does. So, and finding the policies that are directly on my granddaughter is screaming on the other side of the door here, but finding the policies that are direct analogs at each of the universities so that they can be compared. I think we, given that this was our first one, we were a little, I'm not saying we're flying by the seat of our pants because we had a plan, but I also work at Boise State, and I had insider baseball knowledge of things there that were helpful to put in the report. And I don't know that that's necessarily the best way to go. I think using the internet as a search engine is good. The second thing I think that I would say is that if you can engage legislators in this, getting the legislators to ask the university for information works a lot better than Freedom of Information Act. We could not really get anything out of Boise State when it came to Freedom of Information Act applications. And but when the legislators asked the University of Idaho questions, we got, I think, very good documentation of their reports and plans. So get the universities to give you the information if you can, because it's very the stuff that's not online is good to have. And I know you wanted to maybe talk about the service learning aspect too.
Yeah, sure. So we mentioned service learning briefly in the report, but again, we don't go very deeply into it, but it's really a significant marker of social justice education because it just shows the slide away from the pursuit of truth and academic knowledge and more towards progressive activism, actually trying to train students to get used to organizing, partaking in activism, and pursuing careers in activism. And so we, like I said, the English department has some requirements for experiential learning or service learning in their first year writing. But I also noticed as I was going through this that a lot of Boise State senior capstone requirements do have service learning or experiential learning requirements in them. And so that's something I think would be really important to go in further. For anyone else that wants to replicate a report like this, I would definitely suggest including that more.
You mentioned, and there's, I think, a phone call in my background, which I can't attend to, and I apologize. You've mentioned the number of courses, 4 or 5, that students had to take. I don't think you did a tuition estimate for that. Is that doable? And would that be effective for legislators to say, here's the amount of tuition you have to spend on social justice courses?
You want me to go here, Anna? I'll go. Anna works with the legislature more than I do, so knowing what is effective there is really her ballpark. I mean, even that estimate of 4 or 5 is kind of difficult. The thing that one of the great things that Anna did, and for those who have the report, it's on page 18, 19, 20, and 21, is she made a map. And what the map is you're an incoming freshman. Here are all of your distribution requirements. And we gave an account of how each distribution is, how much of each distribution is infused with social justice ideology. So just for an example, in the social sciences, 15 out of the 28 classes in their course descriptions have social justice language in it. So the thing that you run up against when you give a direct number is I would say the lack of knowledge of how general ed works. Right. And you're giving a kind of false security or a false certainty on a particular issue. And so I've been leery of doing such an estimate like that. I'm not saying I'm against it in principle. I'm against it in practice, because I think really the estimate that we have here, and one of the chatters mentioned this, and I think this is totally true. This is a very conservative estimate of how much social justice ideology is on the campus. Just looking at their course descriptions, these things could be 10 years old. We don't know who's teaching these classes. We didn't get their syllabus. We didn't record the classes and listen to them. I think there's a deeper way to go into it. But to get back to your question, David, I think that we're leery of giving the legislators false certainty in this report, though I think we could do an average and figure out a total. Do you think that would be persuasive to them, Anna?
Yeah, I do think that it's persuasive. I actually, I have talked to a few legislators about this. I think the average cost per credit at Boise State is around $700. Correct me if I'm wrong, Scott. But so that means that to take at least 4 social justice courses, you're paying close to $3,000 to the university just to graduate and you're taking social justice courses that you may not want to take at all, and that you shouldn't have to take. And when I've told legislators that, a lot of them have been like, oh, wow. And they've been, it definitely gives them a different perspective. So I think that's definitely an important thing to calculate and to share, because the financial impact is a big barrier for students graduating.
I'm going to have a question which might be, in fact, so inside baseball, you're not allowed to talk about it, but for people who are interested in approaching foundations and getting them to fund and support that, a project like this, can you give them any tips on how people might approach foundations to maximize the chances of success for support?
All right. Well, I'll give a stab at this. This came about because there's a friend of mine who I talked to about this, who used to be in finance, and I was sitting on his front porch with him at the beginning of COVID, and I said, you know what we need is something like this. And he said, Scott, that's a great idea. And he said, how much do you need to do it? And I said, well, I mean, I just need a underling. I need someone to collect all this data. And the Idaho Freedom Foundation was hiring Anna at the same time, and so it was kind of we now have an education analyst, but it was done really cheaply because when it comes to data collection, because we relied on stuff that was available on the internet, and so how to approach a foundation, I think, is to talk about the bang for the buck. We'll have a template for you if you want to follow it. It's not going to be that costly to run the whole report and to use the template. And we have narrative about how you get to the point where you can execute the various things that you need to execute within the plan. We have categories for that are draw you to what you're going to do. So I think there's the big bang for the buck here, and that's what I would probably emphasize.
Thank you. I just want to say from the chat, Anna should ask for a raise. I just wanted to put that onto video for eternity so that everybody knows this. You mentioned
working
having
with me, is that what it is? Because she has to work with me.
You mentioned getting a database of 100 colleges, and I just want to say to people, there's, I think that's what, in the neighborhood of 4,500 colleges and universities in the United States. So when we're talking a database of 100, that's out of that many. I wanted to follow up, how many public universities are there in Idaho? So you say you're going through all of them. How many will that be if you can finish it all?
There's 4 of them. So there's Boise State University of Idaho, Idaho State University, and Lewis Clark State University. So we're planning to do all of them. And just to expand on the last point a little bit more, we also are, I am interested at least in doing this work with other organizations. If workload is a problem, we want to expand this in other states, and we want to help them, show them how to do the template. And so as far as going to foundations, I mean, come talk to us and we can help you at Idaho Freedom and figure out how to get a project like this off the ground in your state.
Nifty, thank you. Actually, I have a question about housing, actually. This is sort of nuts and bolts, I suppose, but what proportion of the students at Boise State are on-campus housing? As opposed to like living off campus?
Well, it used to be a strictly commuter school. I would say when I began here, when my career began in 2000 at Boise State, I would guess that the percentage is now above 50% and is probably close to 60%. That's another area where we could have done like a deeper job if we could have found the events that the residence hall directors put on for their for the people that live in their residence halls. I think that would have been a more powerful thing. But there's only so many hours in the day. But yeah, it's a pretty high percentage.
Yeah, I just looked it up, actually. It says 67%. I don't know how recent that is, but 60. So you were right on, Scott. 67% of students living on campus. That's a lot.
Thank you. I'm actually going to, there's a bunch of questions here on both chat and Q&A. I'm going to switch to them, and I know that the order on my screen has switched since this began. So I'm not going to do this in the order they were posted, and I apologize to the people posting questions. There was that question about there is, more stuff that is being done that's social justice than, is showing in the, what's showing up in the websites. Have you had, and can you get the students to talk about what's being done? Have you had practical thoughts about how to sort of build on this so that you could get reports from students for some later report?
Yeah, to me, this is one of those instances of you can't let the perfect be the enemy of the good. This is a conservative estimate. We should be self-conscious that it's a conservative estimate. The amount of work that it would take to take it to the next level, which we actually started to do, which would be to get course syllabi for these particular classes and then look at the readings. It requires kind of a special knowledge that only a few people are going to have. Oh, D'Angelo, this book. Oh, no, not this. This isn't social justice. So being able to, see the reading lists and such would be, I think, the next stage. But I just think that the bang for the buck there is not worth it. At least not at this stage, not at the initial stage of making an initial assessment. Just use their words. Just use their words at this point. And because I think if you went to the student experience, look, that would be better. If you could listen to what happened in every class, that would be better. But, we're not Big Brother and we can't be everywhere. And it's difficult to get something done, I think, with that level of detail. So, yeah.
I'm just going to mention here, I believe Texas has a state law that all public universities have to provide the curriculum on the internet. Sometimes they don't do it till after you've already signed up for the course, and that's a problem too. But I'll just sort of throw out maybe going to the state legislature and asking them to have a law requiring public posting of curricula in all public university classes might be a useful tactic here. I'm going to have a question from Kurt Byron. Considering that it may be difficult to roll back all the social justice programs, would it be worthwhile using the current popularity of the idea of diversity to try to initiate efforts aimed at intellectual diversity? Going once, going twice.
Well, I mean, obviously we would like intellectual diversity. I think there's a real question of strategy here. And it's something that I've thought deeply about as we encounter people based on this report. And that is, do you want people, when they hear the word diversity, to like want the real version? Or do you want them to now just hear the word tyranny? And talk about, use a different word to capture what a genuine educational experience with different viewpoints would represent on the campus. And I think it's very difficult to mandate intellectual diversity. And there are certain ways you can create, I think, centers on campus to do that. But if the university doesn't value it, it's just not going to be valued or acted upon. So I'm leery of efforts to use their categories against them because it's proven so futile over the last 15, 20 years. I guess that's where I am now on that. But, you know, I could be persuaded otherwise.
Okay. Anna, do you want to add to that, or?
I'll add a little bit. Yeah, I mean, I think it would be probably a failing strategy. I mean, you want a university whose goal is to pursue truth and protect free inquiry and pursuit of knowledge and all of these things. But, you know, I think Hillsdale does that. I think, you know, all girls schools do that. You know, I think there's a lot of schools that don't have what they mean by diversity on their campus that are pursuing truth and goodness. And so I think diversity, as Scott was explaining, is kind of a never-ending goal that kind of results in actually kind of tyranny and discrimination. And so I think that I don't think that's the best strategy to take.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to go to a question from Janice. Do you find that most legislators are aware that social justice is an ideology and not just a way to expand tolerance and sensitivity? Or do you have to do a lot of explaining about the critical race theory basis for this trend on campuses? And I'll just add to that, there's a different question. Do you have to explain the difference between equality and equity and what equity means that is distinct from equality?
I think you definitely have to explain those things to people. I mean, I've gotten tons of emails since this came out, just asking people, or people asking me to define terms. And the purpose of this report was to show that social justice ideology, social justice education exists on campus and how deep it goes, not necessarily to prove whether or not it's a good thing, or even, we do talk a little bit about what it is, but a lot of people have written about whether or not it's a good thing or a bad thing. And so our goal is to show how far it goes. But you definitely have to define those things. I mean, social justice is heavily influenced by critical race theory, by cultural Marxism. And so there is a difference between equality and equity. And a lot of people don't understand this. A lot of students that have been in the system their whole life, they've never been taught these things. And so it's a big it's battle and struggle to explain all of this. So there's a lot of catching up to do.
Okay. Scott, do you want to add to that?
Yeah, I mean, this is part of retooling conservatism. Conservatism has long talked about the higher ed reform in terms of like multiculturalism versus freedom, and this has been going on for a while, and now it's to the point where we have to say it's social justice ideology or America, and so I think the heavy lifting that needs to be done isn't just to show, which I think a lot of people have done well. James Lindsay and his group have done this very well. What they've shown is that social justice ideology can compromise the engine of progress and truth. And I think what needs to be written and what needs to be taught to legislators and citizens is how this ideology undermines the idea that we can live together in peace and harmony as fellow citizens in a liberal republic. And it's not only harming the advancement of knowledge, it really harms the social fabric. And it dishonors excellent citizens. It compromises the tranquility and peace of mind that citizens want to have, and is so close to what it is to live in a civil society. And I mean, I'm in the process of writing such a thing, but I do think it's a very needful thing, because it's a retooling of conservatism. Just like Reagan taught conservatives why they should be concerned about, let's say, tax cuts, today we have to teach conservatives why they should be concerned about social justice ideology. It's not simply a threat to freedom, though it is. It's a threat to the country. And why should we be funding an ideology on these campuses that points to our own suicide? And so I just think that it requires a lot of retooling. Anna's on the ground and doing that stuff, but you know, I see the genuine need for that.
Thank you. Yeah, this is another very specific question, but I think it's worth asking. Which of the Idaho legislative committees, Senate and House, are most directly involved in influencing the funding and control for the 4 universities? And I ask because that's the specific question that everybody in every state needs to know an answer to. Anna, I suspect he's pointing at.
So in Idaho, they have a joint finance committee that reviews university budgets every year. And so that is the main committee that will set a budget and then send it either to the House or the Senate to vote on either accepting or rejecting the budget. In the past, budgets have been rejected, you know, multiple times, 3 or more times before they finally pass a university budget. And so that is the committee where most of the control is. It's a joint committee. There's members of the House, members of the Senate on that committee. And they will give a recommendation. They'll most likely introduce it on the House side because the House is more conservative than the Senate side. And so they're more likely to reject things. So they often want to fight it out in the House before it goes to Senate. So they know when it goes to Senate, it'll probably pass whatever it is. But yeah, so they're equally involved in budget setting, both sides.
Thank you. I think a few of these questions have alluded to this, but I'll just ask this straight out. Idaho, you're going to get a lot of traction, relatively speaking, because it's a red state. Do you have a sense of how tactics ought to be different in a purple state or a blue state, other than despair?
Well, there I think the ground has to be laid more. There, the account of why social justice compromises the American future, I think, is where you have to lead. And then follow with how far it has embedded itself into higher education institutions. The advantage, insofar as it's an advantage of a red state, is that there's more bones in it. You know, the bones of the legislators and the citizens object to this. They can't necessarily explain why, other than they draw a conclusion that is salutary. And so I think in other states you have to lay the groundwork more, and I think that's, you know, very important work everywhere. But I think it's essential in places where there aren't ears to hear. You have to make them hear, and you have to be persuasive on that issue. So I think there you have to do a dual track. You have to be serious about pointing out the corruption that proceeds from these ideologies. And then second, show how deeply they're embedded in the universities.
I think also expanding on that, I would be really excited to see this project in a purple state, because I think in a red state, oftentimes, I don't know if this is the case in every red state, but I think it's the case here, is that a lot of times legislators can become very complacent, and they're sort of afraid to address anything that is controversial or that might be take some willpower. And I think in purple states, at least Republicans often or people on both sides are encouraged to be bold, to really stand up for what they believe in. They're sort of hardened in a way. And so I think it would be really exciting to see this project in a purple state.
Thank you. Comment, we need to do the same type of study for some representative high schools and middle schools, maybe even elementary. And I'm going to add personally, definitely elementary. This social justice stuff is also, of course, going throughout the K-12. Is Idaho Freedom Foundation looking into social justice in K-12? Can you think of natural ways to extend this sort of report to K-12 education?
We're definitely looking at it in K-12. The thing about Idaho, this goes back to a point you made earlier, David, is that it's difficult to know exactly what's happening in K-12 schools because curriculums aren't on the website. You know, it'd be great policy if the legislator told public schools they have to put their curriculum and syllabi up on the website for parents to see, not just their curriculum, but their specific syllabi and the books that they're required to read and all these things, so that parents can decide before they send their child to the school whether or not they're okay with what their child is being taught, instead of all of a sudden in the middle of a semester having their child bring home an assignment and they're uncomfortable with it and are forced with the decision to remove their child in the middle of a semester or whatnot. I definitely think this project could be applied at the K-12 level. It would be a lot more complicated. It would take a lot longer because obviously there's a lot more K-12 schools. But I think the priority in K-12 has to be giving students choice. You know, choice is already the norm in higher education. So students know what's going on in a school. They can easily go somewhere else. In K-12 education, at least public education, you know, choice is not the norm at all. You go to the school that you're assigned to by your zip code. So if you don't like your curriculum and you can't afford to go to another school, then, you know, tough luck. So I think, you know, our priority right now is getting choice for K-12 students. But hopefully in the future we'll be able to apply an analysis like this.
Yeah, the head of Idaho Freedom wrote a little blog the other day about Idaho needs a 1776 project. And I really think that we could at least begin by looking at the social studies division of the state education, whatever it is, the big building in Boise there, the Department of Education, and see what kinds of curriculum they're recommending. And then following it. I mean, I think the thing that would make a K-12 thing successful on this is a flagging of books and curriculum as objectionable, and then a discovery at a random sample of school districts of who's adopted that. And it would be difficult really to look at every school district. But you know, I think that there are methods of doing it. I have some hope that such a thing will happen here over the next couple of years because of the idea that the 1776 project now has to go to the states. I think we could get support for that. And look, I mean, it's about saving the country as far as we look at it. And as citizens, we're very concerned with where this is everywhere. So so K-12 is definitely on the agenda.
Thank you. I have a question. Are these policies violating, strict scrutiny in relation to, race preferences, to sex preferences, civil rights violations? I mean, in effect, they're always skirting the spirit of the law, but are they violating the letter as well?
Yeah. So last year, Idaho passed its own civil rights initiative through the legislature. Ward Connerly now lives in Idaho, and he talked to his representative, and it was passed last year. So that is now state law. And the problem, I think, is that none of the universities in Idaho are that good. And you have a decent university to practice affirmative action. When it comes to admissions, because there's a smaller pool of interested applicants from so-called underrepresented minorities, and so it's difficult to practice it because they're being gobbled up by schools that are better. And in hiring, I think the situation is what you described, David. We want universities will say, we want a woman studies professor, but it's open as to what kind of, what sex the person is. So when you create a position, you're creating it for someone of a particular demographic group, and that's the way the law has been skirted on that. And I think it's, I don't, I think you're right. The spirit of the law is being violated, but I don't think that nationally that's considered to be a violation. And I don't have much hope that the Idaho courts would depart from the national interpretations.
Anna, same take or slightly anything to add?
Nope, I agree. Yeah, I don't have anything to add to that one this time.
Okay. I have a somewhat technical bit from Mitchell Langbert, and I think it's worth doing the technical question because one does want to be really good on the technicalities of these. And for anybody wanting to do a similar project, these are good questions to keep in mind. So a couple of points, says Mitchell. In the future, would it be possible to validate the archival findings with survey data from students as to what is occurring in the classroom? I'm in part thinking that there might be a ritual effect in fields like business and engineering, whereby professors voice social justice rhetoric to satisfy administrators. Hence, comparing students' impressions might be useful. Also, it might be useful to compare colleges in red and blue states, both as to archival data that you are analyzing and samples of survey data.
Yes, let me speak to that. That's something I've been thinking about. So the original commission report that President Castro had released in 2017, July 2017, was based on survey data among the students. And there were claims, that like 12%, I'm making these numbers up, but it's close to this. 12% of the students felt like they were discriminated against at Boise State. 3% of the students felt unsafe, and these seemed to be extraordinarily high numbers, and therefore it justified the launching of all of these initiatives. And what I would like to do is every 2 or 3 years reproduce that survey and show how the diversity inclusion regime that Boise State is building out is actually compromising the culture. If it is, I mean, I would like surveys like that done. Conversations have been had with funders for such a thing, and I expect that sometime over the next year and a half, we will accomplish such a survey. I think it's very interesting what the question asker, the way the question asker put it, is looking at this as a way of validating the archival findings. I think that it could be used like that, but we want to have a little section in here on the campus climate and how it has changed over the course of this plan that the university is adopting. So I think absolutely measuring the opinions of people on the ground is going to be part of this going forward.
Thank you. Comment from John Fennell. The key for K-12 is to influence state curricular standards. This is a heavily bureaucratic process centered in the State Department of Education. I would agree. I think this is really important. I guess getting back to your plans for K-12, do you have a sense of how to approach the influencing the state curricular standards, whether via the legislature or via approaching the relevant bureaucrats directly?
Yeah, so right now, Idaho's in the middle of a big Common Core battle, whether or not to get rid of Common Core or what to replace it with. As Scott suggested, they could replace it with something like the 1776 Commission. Of course, the real problem here is that people are never really going to agree on exactly what should be taught in a public school. But a better way to handle it would be to give power back to parents so that they can go to a school that teaches something they want their children to learn. But certainly in a public school that's supposed to be cultivating good citizenry, it makes sense constitutionally to have something like 1776 curriculum that teaches accurate history about America. So I think legislators should definitely look at that. But of course, we are not fans of Common Core and of state setting curricular standards for every single school in the state, because it's just central planning of ideas. And we think, every single school district, every single individual school should be able to meet the needs of the particular body that they're they're serving, the students that they're serving, the families that they're serving. And so really choice is a more powerful tool than just deciding what should be taught in a public school, because then families can go where the kids can learn something that they want their children to learn about. But I mean, again, if they're getting rid of Common Core is probably not going to happen, or at least getting rid of state standards is definitely not going to happen because it's tied to federal money. So I think 1776 is definitely something they should look at least for their history curriculum.
And I would, John Fennell lives like a mile away from me. So hi, John. Thanks for that.
Thank you. This is still K-12, and I'm going to ask this part one because the people are asking this question, and two, the audience, and two, because I think they're asking this rightly. I mean, I do think that the higher education question of social justice, you do also need to consider the K-12 aspects as well. But this is from Luke. Regarding K-12, the Cato Institute sponsored a series of lectures on American history from a classical liberal perspective that was offered to hundreds of high school teachers. They apparently were totally impressed, and it was eye-opening. You know, I think the thing was derailed by COVID, but should be looked into. I guess to broaden that, how effective is teacher education? And I guess, can whatever is being done at the K-12 level be done on the undergrad level as well, the higher education level?
Oh my goodness. That's a very interesting question. You know, I often tell my students before, so I teach at a university, and I tell my students that one thing about college professors that you have to know is that the ideas that they have are much closer to the heart of their identity than any person you'll ever meet. And I'm not saying that they can't learn, but the fact that there's disagreement on ideas is going to rub that group of people the wrong way more than any other group of people that you'll ever meet. And so the prospects, to me, for fixing this ship after it has sailed, that is fixing the college professor and getting them to be more interested in the ideas of the American founding or the bases for Western civilization, that's a heavy lift, very heavy lift. And I think there is more opportunities for that at the K through 12 level because of the continuing education demands and the fact that people are looking for usable curriculum. So if you make an excellent curriculum, you're more likely to get someone to buy it. And that group of people is just less ideological than university professors. And, you know, it's hard to say this because as I say, I'm a university professor. And so no one can disagree with me or I'll hate you, right? But I think it's a real fact that the core of personal identity for a university professor is much more uncompromising than it is for K through 12 teachers. So I think it's difficult to imagine successful continuing education on that level.
Thank you. Anna, did you want to?
Yeah, I'll add to that a little bit. I mean, just as far as what's going on the K through 12 level, I mean, public and some private schools all across the country are giving their teachers anti-racism training, implicit bias training. You know, this has become a norm. You know, I have a very good friend that teaches at a big public school district, and they spend hours on anti-racism training. And they should be obviously doing, they call it professional development. It's not professional development, it's subversion to a intimidating ideology. And, you know, so there needs to be some serious reform in the K through 12 level for teacher training as well. They just spend a lot of time convincing people they should feel guilty for having white skin or for being a man, and instead of actually training them for how to teach students better. Or like Scott said, to have appreciation for our founding or for ideals of America that are worth defending and worth standing up for. So I think Scott covered what's the possibility for higher education is for reforming teacher trainings, but that's just a little bit on K through 12 and how there's a lot of need for reform there as well.
Thank you. I will go back to higher education now. A question from Tom Blau. What about the accreditors? And this is something I really care about too. So can you say something about the role of the accreditation process in extending social justice ideology? And I'll just say quickly, by the way, for the people listening, there are these 7 regional accreditors. It's a which make it possible for colleges and universities to be qualified to receive all the federal money. And it's a semi-autonomous, semi-regulated system, and an awful lot of decisions about how the universities are run is done in response to this whole accreditation system. So Scott or Anna?
Yeah, I mean, I learned most of what I know about this from David and from NAS. So I almost want to throw it back to you, David. But whenever I have a microphone in front of me, I got to use it, right? So, you know, what's a remarkable thing, I've been on accreditation committees at the university that I work for. And it's remarkable how it's really a closed system. So the accreditors look at what the university has promised to do, and then they say, you need to do what you promised to do. And then they also say, why don't you promise to build out a diversity inclusion infrastructure? So then the university, reacting to the suggestions of accreditors or maybe to the demands of accreditors, puts that in there as a plank, something that they're going to pursue. And then, but they don't fund it well enough. So the accreditors come back the next time the school needs to be accredited and say, hey, you say you have a commitment here. Are you living up to your ideal? No, you need to put more resources behind that. And the university goes, oh, don't make me put resources behind that. You want me to put resources behind diversity, inclusion, and equity? Oh, boom, they put resources behind it. So there's a kind of collusion that happens between administration and accreditors. You can actually see it in a very greasy way happen on every accreditation visit. And so accreditors is also really crucial. Now, so this is my kind of pushback on that question. I do think it's important. I'm not denying it's important. The problem is, once you see the complexity of the whole, you say, well, why do we even bother studying it? and so something, you know, people study the accreditors, and we know something about what the accreditors do and what they demand and how they interact with the schools. And I think it's crucial. But if we add to a report on these particular universities a section on accreditation, we create like a huge hurdle for getting something done in an efficient way that actually still paints a picture about what the university is doing. So I'm not saying accreditors is a distraction. I'm not saying K through 12 is a distraction, but I am saying that in order to get something like this done, you have to narrow your visage and stay in your lane, and then follow the road signs, and that's what we try to do. And we know that that's an intellectual failing, and it's a blind spot, or appears to be a blind spot. We wrote the report knowing about the importance of accreditors. They come up a few times in here, but I think if we open that can of worms, then we never get a report done.
All right. I will not say Anna this time, but if you want to say anything, you know, jump in. But this is actually an early question, and I want to say it because I think it's actually generalizable. From Stephen Elliott: whatever happened to the dominant norms? I find the changes in the last 2 decades mystifying and alarming. I worked overseas for 15 years, and each time I came home, you know, I noticed some good and some bad changes, but increasingly ones that I felt somewhat uncomfortable in. And I'm saying this and that it's generalizable because I'm imagining for most people, this is what it's like when they suddenly discover what a university is like, or when they suddenly discover their kids are going to school. And in fact, they've been away from this for 15 or 20 years. They hop back in, and what on earth happened? And I ask this because I imagine your answer, the way you say this, whatever happened, is something you have to say to any citizen who's just, in effect, suddenly waking up and finding that the world has changed in the last generation.
Yeah, I mean, I'm interested in everyone's perspective on this because I think this is one of the confusing aspects of trying to understand where our world is going. And I'm going to try to take a longish view of this. You know, Buckley wrote God and Man at Yale in the early 50s. The critique of the university as too hostile to the civilization that gave rise to it is 3 generations old. And in a way, what we are experiencing, you know, Alan Bloom wrote Closing the American Mind in '88. We could look at that as like a 2nd generation critique of the same thing. And now we're in the 3rd generation. And the way I look at it is there is no longer any fact to live off of. The people who've been trained now have been trained by people who never knew the Western tradition. And so universities are going to be fad chasing ideological machines as a result of that. And this is current reality. How do I explain its sudden rise to prominence? I mean, I don't think a particular event can explain it because it's happening in most places in the Western world. It seems to be it seems to be universal, like it's been ordained by providence everywhere in our world. And who am I to question the wisdom of providence if it's everywhere, right? But I do think that what we're experiencing is why NAS was founded. Root of a process, pursuit of knowledge has really been against the tradition, and therefore very susceptible to ideological.
I'll elaborate on that a little bit just based on my own experience. I mean, I think people haven't realized how complacent they've become with what they're taught. You know, I was homeschooled the majority of my life. And when I did go to school, I realized that I was the only person in the vast majority of my classes that ever dissented. And it wasn't necessarily because I had a superior, amazing education or something, but it's because I was taught differently than everybody else. And I was taught that it was important to critically think and to reason about what you believe and not to offload your responsibility for thinking and acting to someone else, especially not someone teaching something that's very ideological. And so I just think, my experience of going into a classroom and just seeing how everyone is just accepting whatever a professor said to them, whatever side of the aisle they were on, having no willingness to debate or to ask sincere questions or something, just accepting it. I think people have just become very complacent. They don't want to buck the status quo. They're afraid to be called a name. And so they just go along with whatever tell them to. And it's a very serious problem. And so I really resonate with the story that that listener told about coming back and being sort of shocked, because I was certainly shocked when I started college and had that experience too.
Thank you. Question from Terry Gannon. How best could a nonprofit interface with the grassroots effort you have apparently pursued? What would be a good complement to your efforts?
The best complement to our grassroots efforts is if you're an alumni who's been donating to the university, or just someone that's been donating, would be to stop giving to the university if you disagree with their aims. The other thing is if you're a student or attending one of these universities, was be to practice resistance in some way, to not just go along with what trainings you're put through or what you're told to do by a professor, or if you're told how to think, or if you're given a bad grade, you feel like not because your argument was bad, but because you feel that they just disagreed with you, to ask sincere questions about it of faculty members and to try to create change. So to resist in a way, individuals and giving to universities, donating to them, that's definitely one of the most powerful forces. So I would definitely put a lot of weight on that.
Scott?
And I just see the need for other states to do similar report. I think that really would complement our efforts. I think it can really only be done through an organization like Idaho Freedom. Obviously, other states have their own think tanks and advocacy groups, but they have the ability let me put it like this. As an academic, I have a very narrow audience. But as a person who will publish this through someplace like IFF or the Buckeye Institute in Ohio, they have an audience. They know how to put the work products in the hands of serious people who are closer to decision making. And so I think it's you can't just produce one of these things and expect there to be an effect. And you can't simply create an organization out of nothing in order to make an effect. So it has to be done through some sort of established channel that is interested in academic reform. And NAS exists on the national level. There's very few state organizations that have the same heft. So the kind of think tank that IFF is really a logical complement.
To put just a point on that, every single state has a think tank, every single one of them, and they all have the same ability, like Scott said, to do what we have done with this report. And we can partner with you. We would love to partner with you. Please reach out to us. Please reach out to this. If you're a citizen, just reach out to the think tank in your state and encourage them to do something like this. Tell them that you're concerned about higher education reform, and that will, encourage them more to look into it and hopefully reach out to us as well.
And I should say, by the way, send email to me at the NAS so I can see what we can do to be helping this too, spreading the word to other think tanks and so on. Send an email. Some comments people were doing following up, for instance, Vesna Radovich, but students will be punished for resisting. And what do you say to that?
Students have been punished for resisting at different universities, but it usually becomes a spectacle. Here's the thing, you can get punished now and hopefully create some type of change or help other people think a little bit differently, or you can get punished even worse ways down the road as this ideology advances, and you're going to regret having not acted. So there's always going to be consequences to your actions. People don't like the truth. People don't like being told that they're wrong, especially when they're buying into his ideological worldview. But you have a responsibility as a thinking person to act, and bravery definitely inspires more bravery. And so I would be surprised if other people in some way didn't rally around you and help you.
Thank you. And Scott, did you want to add anything to that, or?
I was just going to start talking about Solzhenitsyn, and but I think Anna captured what I would have said anyways.
Yes, I believe the essay "Live Not by Lies" by Solzhenitsyn is available on the internet if people want to look that up. It is quite inspirational. The blogger Rod Dreyer cites it often, and I think correctly. Follow up on the nonprofits and alumni again from Terry Gannon. So how can a nonprofit best take the message to the alumni?
Well, that's a little tricky because, of course, you can't get lists of alumni from universities and their contact information. So you sort of have to do field research. I mean, we have people that are alumni of universities that we're evaluating here that are donors to us that are changing their perspective, even though they love the university and see so much potential in that university. But they want reform. I mean, it's really just spreading the word, speaking out about it, not being afraid to post something about this on social media, not being afraid to have a conversation with your neighbor, to tell them about what's going on in higher education, just spreading the word on the ground, teaching it to your children, all of that.
A comment then, I think part of the, Lotus Jones, I think part of the problem is that the educational system doesn't teach people to think critically. If it did, all classrooms would be structured differently. I'm going to add to that of course, critical thinking is an endless mantra now, except what they mean is we criticize a particular point of view, anything conservative, traditional, pro-civic American, and we have mindless support for ours. I guess my follow-up is, can one say one's in favor of critical thinking at this point without getting caught in this horrible simulacrum of it? And is there another word we could use? And if we are going to use the same word, how precisely would one teach critical thinking? What are the principles by which we can define it, which will avoid having it be captured to mean propaganda and conformity?
Yeah, So I'm only 50 years old, but this question makes me feel very old. The way I think about that is that, you know, an education structured around functions isn't the education we fought for. It's an education around knowledge of particular things. And, you know, it'd be great to be able to read Dostoevsky or Shakespeare. It would be great to know what the Federalist Papers argue about constitutional government and how it was criticized by Woodrow Wilson. It's great to know particular things. And in the knowledge that we have of particular things, we think and we ask questions about who's right and who's wrong. And that thinking, I guess you could call critical thinking. And so, I mean, I think in the ideal circumstance, we'd want to say that education has content, and we wouldn't want to judge the success of an education or even the image of an education based on functions that we want to get out on the other side. Those functions are kind of an accidental byproduct of the actual engagement that goes on in classrooms and in writing and in discussions. And so I think, you know, my view of this is that once you get on the function bandwagon, it's a losing battle for those who want to have an education that enriches in the culture and it reflects a knowledge of what has come before us and what is possible and what's not possible in the future. And so, as I say, it's kind of an old school answer, but that's what I would say.
Thank you. Anna, did you want to add?
I don't have anything
Nope.
to add on this one.
I have getting back to the practicalities, how long did it take you to do the Boise State report? How long do you think it'll take you to do the University of Idaho? How long do you think it'll take you to do all 4 colleges?
Boise State took maybe 3 months. And of course, this is the longest it will take us to do one of these reports. Maybe it was 4 months, but because we had to come up with the design, which takes way longer than you would think it would. And we had never done this before. We didn't really have a template. And so we were doing everything for the first time. And Scott discussed this a little bit earlier, but we didn't know that filing a public records request was necessarily the wrong way to do things, because it would take 25 days or more to get information back. Instead, we should have gone through a legislator and things. So in the future, going through this report, we're basically just using this framework, applying it to another university, but we don't have to start from scratch. So it'll be much faster. I think maybe we've only been working on University of Idaho for a month, and I think maybe 1 more month and we'll have it done. So we haven't quite cut our time in half, but almost for the rest of them.
Yeah, I mean, to build on that, you know, some parts of the narrative are reproducible, so that the pages on why we would study this, we can use in each study. The pages on what you look for when it comes to the administration or student life can be done with very minimal changes to each for each university. But everything had to be done for the first time when it came to Boise State. I finished, you know, the first 3 sections of the University of Idaho one in probably 13 hours. And that included reading a stack of reports from the strategic plan for diversity and inclusion, showing how it changed from 2004 to 2019. And kind of tracing it. I had my wife sit next to me and read the planks of one report while I looked at the other report to see how there were changes. 19 pages of reading together, but you know, it just took 40 minutes, and then it kind of writes itself because you have timelines and goals. So so anyways, that's I think, you know, it wasn't the only thing on either of our plates for those 4 months. I mean, I got a book published in those 4 months. I write on the side. I teach full time. Anna has other projects. And I think if you boiled it down to hours, we'd probably be talking for Boise State. I don't know. On my end, it was probably 70 hours. And it was probably more on Anna's end because she was more involved in the design. But now that, and at the end of the course, it was just a disaster at the end. you know, we have all the text done, and now we're trying to fit it into this, fit it into the design we have, and there's this change, a little change here, a little change there. So we don't expect we're going to have those problems as we move forward.
All right. Well, it's 3:29. I guess I would love to have the two of you each say something to conclude for the audience, and then I would sort of wrap it up and say goodbye and thank you. So Anna, do you have anything to say first by way of conclusion?
Yeah, just thank you so much for having us. I can't emphasize enough how much it would mean to work on this project in other states. We would love to further this project, to rate other colleges. You know, if you have ideas, if you're working on this in your state, or want to, send me an email. Anna@idahofreedom.net is my email. So contact me anytime. And thank you guys so much for listening and for being invested in this work.
Scott?
Yeah, I mean, I amplify that. Thank everyone for coming, and don't be a stranger when it comes to you know, advice or you know, looking at the report, or we'd be happy to help. It's you know, a very important thing. It's late in the game, is the way I look at it. It's late in the game in this republic, and this is this. I don't know if it's one of the things that's going to put the knife to it, if the knife is already in it, but this ideology is not something that can be our reigning ideology, and we can live together in a liberal republic together. And so I think it's just a matter of grave importance, and this is therefore important work that I encourage all citizens to engage in, and to contact us for help if they would like some. I chatted my email out, so take a look.
Thank you so much. Yeah, so I said at the beginning, please get in touch with me also, randall@nas.org. I'm also delighted to pass on queries to people. This is extraordinarily important work. We're deeply gratified and delighted that the Idaho Freedom Foundation has been doing this, that Scott and Anna have been doing this. Thank you so much for your work. And
don't forget the Claremont, don't forget the Claremont Institute, for whom I work. They're responsible for you know, supplying me.
They're very good people too. Can't say enough good things about them. Anyway, thank you so much, and we will also be continuing to spread the word. You know, whenever you do later reports, we will also be trying to tell people about them so that people can continue to know about your work going forward. So I'm going to say thank you so much, and I think I am going to close it off now. Have a good afternoon, everybody.